Hi, my name's Kevin Martin. Thank you for joining us this week. I'm here with Andy Musa for the weekly update from the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program. We wanted to cover a couple things this week. I'm going to start with Andy. We had a phone call come in, which was outside of certainly my expertise. And it was a grower who was wondering if we had any experience with potato leafhopper.
Yeah, potato leafhopper, generally we don't see as much as grape leafhopper, but we do see it every year. And what happens is it's usually a little later than grape leafhopper because grape leafhopper actually overwinters here, whereas the potato leafhopper doesn't overwinter in the colder climates. So what'll happen is they'll migrate from the southern Gulf states up into our area, and usually later spring, late May, early June, you might start seeing them. But it varies every year because it'll depend on what storm systems we get and things like that. So since they don't migrate here, they don't start as early, and we usually don't get that great populations of them, but we do see them every year, and they can be they can cause some significant damage if you get them in wine grapes, particularly vinifera.
Yeah, this grower was asking about a vinifera block that he had. It was actually near some hops, and we had observed some really sizable populations in the hops,
Okay.
and then had mowed around the hops recently as well.
Okay. Yeah, they have quite a large host range, but usually something like alfalfa or soybeans, they're greater populations. But of course, you'll get them in potato, you'll get them in some vegetable crops, but they will also feed on, grapes and apples. So again, they're not generally, I wouldn't say a common pest. And really with the wine, with the juice grapes and with even say thicker leaved hybrids, they're generally cause minimal problems. You can get the symptoms like yellowing along the leaf margins, leaf cupping. They can also cause stunning of shoots. But again, in American varieties and in a lot of the hybrids, they generally don't cause that much of a problem. But with vinifera varieties, there are varieties that are even among the vinifera that are more sensitive than others. For instance, Chardonnay, white varieties like Chardonnay, Pinot Gris are very sensitive. Cayuga White is, even though that's not a vinifera, that's also a lot more sensitive than say Concords.
Now, is
So
that because they're more of a preferred host than some of the other vinifera even, or is it just because they exhibit symptoms more easily?
they exhibit symptoms. It's not that they're more preferred hosts. Now um, they do, it seems like I said, when they mention the thicker leaved hybrids, and Concords generally have thicker leaves. So it may be that since they're thinner leaved, or I think it also has in other crops, how pubescent the leaves are. So the less pubescent, then the easier it is for them to feed. And the other thing is for the sensitivity, it's the plants are sensitive to the saliva, and they react to that. It's like a toxin, either that or it's just a reaction to the saliva, and also the way that they feed cell disruption. So because of that sensitivity, you have some varieties that are a lot more sensitive maybe to that saliva than those that are not, and that's why you get those yellowing and leaf cupping more so in those varieties. And the thing is, we don't have any threshold levels, though, unfortunately, for potato leafhopper. But I guess there was a study at Michigan State, and they did it on potted, I think it was Pinot Gris, potted plants. And now, again, that's different than the field, but what they found was that as few as one potato leafhopper nymph per leaf could cause the plants to exhibit these symptoms. So, you know, threshold levels can be low for those varieties.
Yeah, so that doesn't necessarily make the leap to financial harm or even like decline in vine size, but certainly without that research being done, because issues are so problematic, you probably want to take care of it, since we don't know what it would take to cause that harm.
Right, right. Now, I think in Ontario, they did something about with sampling, and this sounds to me like, you know, I wouldn't want to see this much injury, but they said something about when, you know, cause for a spray might be, they said, you look, since they feed like on the young tissue, so when you're out scouting, look for the youngest towards the shoot tips and the younger leaves. And if you see that and you see leaves exhibiting 25% of the leaves or something exhibiting symptoms, and that to me seemed, I don't know, a little excessive. Now, I'm not sure if that fact sheet's a little older, but, you know, I wouldn't want to see that many symptoms. So, but if a grower is starting to see some leaf curling and symptoms, you know, turn a leaf over and see if they see those nymphs or the adults. Now, the adults they'll fly away, but the nymphs, they're sort of, since they're wingless, they can't fly, and they have like a greenish or greenish yellow coloration, and when you turn that over, they'll sort of walk sideways like a crab. It's weird where leafhoppers don't, so they'll sort of crab-like movement. And then if you see the nymphs and then you are seeing any symptoms, then, you know, especially on those vinifera varieties, since they're more sensitive, then, you know, as a grower, you're going to have to determine whether you want to put a spray on or not. But if I was seeing, you know, if you didn't have too much trouble finding, you know, at least a few per vine, and you're seeing some symptoms, then I would put a spray on. Now, the good thing about it is if you catch it early and stuff, they will recover. You know, as a newer growth and stuff, they won't exhibit those symptoms.
And what would you use? I mean, are there?
We've got a lot of different materials that we can use. You know, I'd recommend, you know, checking out the spray guide. But if you don't have that, the pyrethroids, any of the pyrethroids work, or the Neonex, which would even work better, like in Meyer Pro, Volume Flexi. That's one of those in Volume Flexi is thiamethoxam, which is the same thing that's in platinum. But platinum is soil applied or irrigation, you know, through irrigation. So, but the Volume Flexi would be foliar wrap. So that Admire Pro, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, and those would work well. I mean, not the Flexi, but the Admire Pro is, you're going to have a 2EE for rootworm, which if that's an issue for you, timing is going to be perfect. If, you know, if you're seeing those both now, that would be likely, that would reflect what we've seen in the field. You know, you'd have a really inexpensive solution there. And the only reason I'd use something else is to rotate chemistries.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, if you do have high enough populations, you know, there's a chance you may have to spray again, but chances are you won't, you know, unless storm system had brought a lot in or whatever. Well, the other thing to mention too is we see them a lot of times, like you said, they were in the hops and then you sort of mowed around it and stuff like that. Or a lot of times if you have like an alfalfa field and they're in there and you mow it down, then what they'll do is they'll move to another food source. So
probably make sure you do that planned mowing before you spray, or at least before the spray is ineffective.
Yeah, or at least if you know you have a soybean or a alfalfa field and they you know they do cut it down, then it would be sort of okay. I better just you know increase my scouting to make sure that they didn't move into the grapes.
Right. Hopefully that helps them out, and anybody else who's starting to have those issues, you know, because like you said, if it came in on a storm, he might not have been the only grower with that question, which is kind of why I wanted to cover it. And this next topic is very similar in that sense. So I had one grower that I talked to with a specific issue that I know other growers have talked to me about, but none of them that I've talked to have gotten it resolved. So this one grower was able to get this issue resolved. So I wanted to touch base on it. Andy, I think you've heard us talk about the economic injury disaster loan program. So that's where I want to head next. This is a small business administration program, and it was opened to small businesses in that first round of COVID-19 funding. It was like a $2 trillion federal spending bill, and this was back in March. And this, along with many of those other programs, ran out of money really quickly. When they refunded it in April, this particular program, EIDL, they only opened it up to farmers because they didn't have a lot of money for it, and they had accidentally or inadvertently excluded farmers from the first round. So the law said farmers were eligible. SBA always denies farmers from everything that they do because farmers are supposed to go to USDA and everyone else is supposed to go to SBA. But this was an exception to that general rule. Unfortunately, the application process was done online, electronically, and they didn't update it. So when you went to apply, they said, "Are you a farmer?" And you said yes, and they said goodbye. So in the second round, they fixed it for farmers. Only farmers were eligible, which is great because it really cut down on the competition. So the first round, the funding was gone in like 24 or 72 hours, something like that. And then the second round, it lasted for weeks and weeks. And they've actually just 4 days ago, they opened it up to other businesses again, which is why I wanted to bring it to the attention of growers. So from what I heard, this loan application program was almost universally successful. So growers who applied for it got it. And what they got was $1,000 per employee that they employ full-time based on different dates. Most people were asked what was going on in their business from January to February. Some people were asked what was going on in 2019. So if you had 10 full-time equivalent employees in February, which a lot of growers do because they're pruning, they got $10,000. The growers that were excluded, it seems like the common denominator was they had a loss on their Schedule F tax return in 2019. So that was a mistake. There were two places to fill out your expenses, or at least that's what SBA has told me, that there were two places. And growers that put it in the wrong place were coded as regular businesses rather than ag. And if you're a regular business and you had a loss, you don't get the advance or the loan. If you're ag, you do. But inadvertently, many growers were excluded if they had a loss in 2019. So unfortunately, there were a number of growers who didn't get that cash advance. And that cash advance varies from $1,000 to $10,000 based on the number of employees. So, if you had 3 employees, you get $3,000. And you count as an employee, depending on what type of business organization it is. Even if you don't pay yourself, you count as an employee.
So then there was a number of growers that contacted you that actually got denied then, that should have gotten that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And
so
before you appeal, which is kind of an intimidating process because an appeal is an administrative law judge, judicial action type thing. The one thing you can do is ask for reconsideration. It may be as simple as, so I've seen a couple of different ways you can ask for reconsideration. The best way is probably to give them a phone call or to reply to your email that you received denying you funds. I have heard of one grower or a business, not a grower, that got reconsideration by just applying again.
Okay.
But I've also, as this is kind of evolving rather quickly, growers that have tried to do that have also not been reconsidered because the system automatically finds it as a duplicate application and only uses their original application, which is then immediately denied again. So contact SBA. You can do that either through email or the phone. And what they'll need is just more documentation of your existing application. What they typically are going to ask for is a Schedule F, or if you don't have a Schedule F, something similar. They're going to see that you have a loss, but it's related to farming. And my understanding is then you will be approved for the advance.
Okay. So then essentially every farmer is eligible for this, and even if they don't employ anyone, they should get at least $1,000.
Right. Yes. Yes. And like I said, this is an advance that doesn't need to be paid back. If there are changes in the program, you still don't need to pay it back. So there have been some changes in how eligibility is determined. So once you get that money, it's yours, even if you would have been ineligible otherwise. The second part is, I think it's a 21-day process, basically, if you respond fast enough. So once you get the I'll call it free money, they invite you to apply for a loan. Now, if you had a loss last year, that probably will continue to impact the size of the loan you're eligible for. But if you didn't, you're certainly going to be eligible for what could be a fairly sizable loan. And that loan's going to be paid back usually over the next 30 years. So if you need capital, it's a good way to get long-term capital. It's not the least expensive right now. You could probably go get variable rate mortgages or crop loans from Farm Credit for less than 3 or 4%, depending on what type of loan you're looking at. And this is going to be right at 3.75. The thing to remember, though, is it's for 30 years. It could be a fairly large dollar amount. It's a fixed rate loan. So for some growers, this will be the cheapest form of capital that they have access to. And if that's the case and they need it, that probably makes a lot of sense.
Now, I was going to ask you, do you know of anybody that sort of reapplied after their denial or contacted SBA?
Yes.
And
that's what brought it to my attention. Is I sort of inferred that the reason these growers were being denied was because of the loss, because that was just the common denominator between the growers that I was talking with, because most have actually been approved. I mean, there's certainly a lot of growers that just didn't apply. But the ones I've talked to, they either got the money or they had a loss last year. And it wasn't until this one grower mentioned that they contacted SBA and they were told that that was an error. They were actually told that it was an error on the part of the farmer or the applicant, that they filled out the application wrong. But I went through it and I didn't see that. I think the portal for applying has changed since that quote unquote error was made. I didn't see another place or another way to fill it out other than showing a loss. So I think a lot of growers got stuck in that trap. It was a strange application process that didn't follow a Schedule F. They were asking for your cost of goods sold, which is not a number that growers have when they're completing their tax return. They could have it for some other reason if it was part of their corporate bylaws or something like that. But most growers, that's not a number that they have to come up with. In the private sector, if you're filing a Schedule C, it's certainly something you're going to have. But farmers, it's just not something they often have access to. So most farmers just use their total expenses. So, if you bought something that depreciated last year, it wasn't supposed to count against you, and it did.
Okay.
So that was really the common denominator in the denials. So I think for some of these growers, if they request a reconsideration, they'll actually get this funding. The one, I think, note of caution is it's the 22nd right now. They reopened on the, I think it was the 17th to other businesses. The good news is there's been very little publicity about that reopening, but I think the bad news is the reconsiderations might be contingent on actually having funding. So if they run out of funding, I don't know if these reconsiderations will actually result in funding for the growers, which has been, for a lot of these growers that have jump through the hoops for PPP and EIDL. For the ones that haven't received anything at all, even after doing all that, PPP was actually a lot of work and paperwork. Most people probably spend at least a couple hours applying. You know, I'm concerned that growers that were denied everything are just sick of the process and don't see any value, especially during the growing season, of investing time in it. And reconsideration is going to take longer than the actual initial application. That was like a 15-minute thing. But now you're going to have to upload documents and submit them. And it's
okay, because I was going to ask you, you know, if you had heard from any growers that requested a reconsideration about how long it took. So I guess it all just depends.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't bad. They had to dig out their tax returns and scan them and upload them. And then they had to write a letter explaining what the issue was, and then send that either by regular mail or email to submit it. So, you know, it was probably a 30-minute procedure, but you know, there were also phone calls associated with it, and I'm sure they spent an hour on hold.
Yeah.
You know, it's not without its faults, but this is an opportunity for a grower to get a $10,000 cash advance. And I don't know what the circumstances are, but behind the loan amounts that they grant, but we've seen loan amounts for mid-sized farms anywhere from $1,000, which is ridiculously small and a waste of time, to $100,000. So if you're qualifying for those large amounts and you want to be, it's a big deal.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good information then.
I think that's all we have for this week. Thank you for joining us. We've got a coffee pot meeting coming up this Wednesday. We do not have any guest speakers, so it will be our shiny, bright, happy faces entertaining you and answering all your questions. That's probably the best way to contact us if you do have questions, is to join us for that coffee pot meeting. You should have registration information in your email if you haven't registered already. We'll join you next week for this podcast. And if you have any questions in the meantime about potato leafhopper, EIDL, or anything else, just give us a call. Thanks, Andy.
Take care.
You too.